In August 1975, the thick summer heat blanketed the Mississippi sky, reflecting on the surface of the Tombigbee River like a red-hot mirror. In the suburbs of Meridian, children's laughter rang out for the last time before fading into the night, and in just a few minutes, a 3-year-old child vanished without a trace. All that remained was a toy car tipped over on the damp grass and a half-finished Budweiser beer can by the porch. As the sun set, panic swept through the neighborhood, then spread to the entire town, but all searches were in vain. No one knew that beneath the silent mud of the river, the Anderson family's secrets had begun to rot. Secrets that would shake all of Mississippi nearly half a century later, when justice finally surfaced from what people believed was forgotten. Before diving into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love journeys to uncover forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. On the afternoon of August 8, 1975, the town of Meridian, Mississippi, was steeped in the sticky summer heat. The Anderson family's small house sat on the edge of a dirt road leading to the Tombigbee River, its tin roof gleaming silver under the late sun. David Anderson, the 35-year-old father, had just gotten off shift at the machine shop, his shirt still dusted with oil, sitting on the back steps with a half-open beer can. Mary, his wife, was taking clothes off the clothesline, her eyes occasionally glancing toward the yard where the two children were playing. Evie, 7 years old, was meticulously stacking small stones, while Miles, 3 years old, fumbled to push a tin toy car along the grassy path, its metallic clatter blending with the humming of cicadas. Around 5 o'clock, the rumble of a truck engine echoed from the road behind the house. Charles, David's brother, stopped by, bringing a smile and a few cans of beer. He sat down on the porch, chatting with his brother, the men's laughter mixing with the scent of yeast spreading across the yard. The sun dipped lower, the light shifting to honey gold, reflecting on the distant water. Mary called out, reminding her husband not to let the kids play too close to the edge of the grass. David mumbled in agreement, continuing the conversation. A short while later, as Mary cleared the dinner table, she called the two children inside. Evie responded from the porch, but Miles was nowhere to be seen. Mary stepped out the back door, scanning the yard, her voice rising as she called for her son, echoing into the silent space. The tin toy car lay tipped over by the steps, one wheel sunk into the mud. The door stood half open, river wind blowing in with a damp chill, and the steady lapping of water. Mary rushed down into the yard, her heart pounding. Small footprints dotted the dirt path leading toward the thick tree line, where the gentle slope dropped to the water's edge. "David, I can't see the boy," she screamed. David slammed the beer can down, rushing out, calling his son's name, his voice breaking in the muggy air. Charles stepped onto the porch too, frowning as he looked around. The river wind picked up, rustling the oak leaves. Mary followed her husband's direction, her eyes darting, seeing only the glint of water and streaks of wet earth mixed in the grass. On the other side, Evie stood huddled by the door, silent. For a moment, the whole yard held only the sound of insects and wind. David turned back, his face pale, saying softly, but firmly, "Call the police." Mary rushed into the house, her hands trembling as she lifted the receiver and dialed the operator. At the other end, the dispatcher's voice rang out amid her gasping breaths. "My son, he's missing." The wail of police sirens tore through Meridian's heavy evening. Blue and red lights swept across the glittering river surface, shining into the dark oak trees. A team of officers from the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Department arrived less than 15 minutes after Mary Anderson's call. They quickly set up a temporary perimeter around the backyard, asking neighbors to step back. David, the father, was still soaked from wading into the riverbank, searching for his son, his face ashen, hands shaking, repeating over and over, "He was just playing here, right here." A young officer took notes on every detail, from the tin toy car tipped over on the steps to the Budweiser beer can placed by the porch. Charles, the brother, stood leaning against a wooden post, silently watching, occasionally glancing toward the dark river. Near midnight, the rescue team arrived with 2 bloodhounds. They followed the mud streaks and small footprints running parallel to the slope, stretching to the still water. One of the dogs stopped, barking loudly, its nose touching a small object half submerged, a child's shoe, white, size 3, caked in mud. Mary recognized it immediately, collapsing to her knees, clutching the wet shoe in the officer's hand. The river wind blew back, carrying the stench of river mud, and a chill that made everyone shudder. The next morning, the search expanded to a 3-mile radius. Local volunteers, high school students, even firefighters joined in. Small boats motored along the banks, nets dragging through every stretch of water. On shore, police marked tire tracks, scraps of paper, or suspicious slides. One clear tire mark near the Andersons' backyard fence was noted. The size didn't match David's truck. Timmons, the lead investigator, ordered photos and plaster casts for preservation. He scanned the patchy yard, his eyes narrowing at the Budweiser can, lying in the grass, its rim faintly dented with teeth marks, still smelling of yeast. "Bag it," he told the forensics tech. By afternoon, clouds rolled in. The first seasonal rain poured down unexpectedly, heavy bursts making the river swell quickly. The search team had to pause. Mud blanketed the paths, erasing footprints and tire tracks. Timmons stood under the porch, checking his watch, then ordered a pullback, noting that the weather was severely hindering efforts. Mary sat in the police car, a wet blanket wrapped around her, eyes fixed on the muddy river. David, still reeking of beer, stood by the car door, mumbling incoherently. The next morning, a sonar team from Jackson arrived to scan the riverbed. Beneath the murky water, the equipment picked up only scattered signals, no human shapes. A torn plastic bag, some logs, scraps of fabric drifting freely. Timmons noted in the log, no body or organic material traces detected. By noon, temperatures rose, river water evaporating into a thick fog. Police suspended the search until afternoon. Over the next 2 days, the rescue team continued combing the downstream swamps, results still empty. At the station, Timmons unrolled a map on the table, circling suspect areas. He ordered re-photographing of the entire scene and soil samples from the Andersons' yard, to compare with dirt on Miles's shoe. Preliminary reports showed matching mud composition, proving the boy likely went straight to the riverbank. However, the strange tire tracks gave him pause. The tread pattern didn't match common local vehicles, possibly a light truck made in Louisiana. When asked, David denied any other visitors besides his brother. Mary confirmed the same. On the third afternoon, the search shifted focus to the low woods near the old shed behind Trinity Baptist Church, over a mile from the Andersons' house. A volunteer group swept the area, finding only rusted metal scraps and old beer cans. Timmons noted, no clear traces proving Miles was ever here. Time passed, chances of finding the boy alive growing slimmer. On the 4th night, an internal sheriff's meeting took place at the Meridian PD office. The summary report showed, no body, no new witnesses, no signs of forced entry, and weather continuing to complicate matters. After consulting superiors, Timmons logged temporarily, high likelihood of drowning accident. However, he added a personal note at the bottom, strange tire tracks, origin unidentified. Keep case open for further investigation. As night fell over the town, the Tombigbee River returned to its usual quiet, only the hum of insects blending with the fading sound of police engines. In the empty Anderson house, the tin toy car sat on the table as evidence, its mud streak dried. The river's damp scent still lingered in the air. On the report form, the final typed line read, no body found, case temporarily classified, possible drowning, suspicions not ruled out. 3 days after the official search ended, the Meridian Police Department transferred the full file on Miles Anderson's disappearance to investigator Earl Timmons, a man in his early 40s, with over 15 years of experience in drowning and child missing persons cases. Timmons started by reviewing all search logs, marking timelines, and seized evidence, from the white shoe to the beer can and soil samples. He ordered re-interviews of everyone present on the night of August 8, including neighbors who only saw the police lights from afar. On his first morning at the scene, Timmons stood in the Andersons' yard, observing every detail in daylight. The tire track the forensics team had cast in plaster was now bagged and sealed, but its old position still scarred the dry ground. He noted in his notebook, wide tread, zigzag pattern, not matching Anderson's vehicles. The Budweiser can had been sent to the lab for fingerprints and fiber traces. Meanwhile, Timmons began the first round of interviews. The first was Mary Anderson. She recounted that afternoon, her voice weary but clear. Miles was playing in the yard. David sat with Charles on the porch, everything normal until she couldn't see her son. When asked about her husband and brother-in-law's relationship, Mary paused, then said, "They're close, but they argue sometimes over money." Timmons noted carefully, eyes fixed on the woman's expressions. Next he interviewed David. The man sat head bowed, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. David insisted his brother only stopped by for about half an hour, leaving before 6 p.m. He said he'd only had a few beers, couldn't recall exactly when Charles left. The next day, Timmons met with Evie, the 7-year-old, the only witness to see Miles last. He brought a family photo from the previous year to test her memory. Evie pointed to Charles's image, and whispered, "Uncle picked up Miles and took him to the yard." The statement made Timmons pause his pen. He asked several times. Evie stuck to her story, unchanging. The report noted, juvenile witness identifies seeing Charles Anderson at the house before the victim vanished. That afternoon, Timmons phoned Charles, who had left Meridian for Louisiana days after the incident. Charles was cooperative, saying he'd only visited that morning on August 8, leaving before noon to drive back to Baton Rouge. When asked if he'd returned to his brother's in the afternoon, Charles denied it outright. He claimed he didn't know about the disappearance until Mary's call. Timmons requested he come to Meridian for a formal statement, but Charles cited work and promised to arrange when convenient. While awaiting a response, Timmons continued gathering evidence. A lighter engraved DA found near where Miles's shoe was discovered was sent for analysis. Results showed it was a 1973 Zippo lighter, hand-engraved with D and A initials, matching David Anderson's. When Timmons asked David, he admitted to owning a similar one but lost it months ago. This detail complicated the file. By week's end, tire track forensics results came back. The sample matched early 1970s Chevrolet C10 trucks, common in southern states, but rare in Meridian. Cross-referencing local registrations, Timmons found a beige Chevrolet C10 with Louisiana plates recorded at a gas station near the Andersons on the afternoon of August 8. The registered owner, Charles Anderson. Timmons' note under the printout, tread matches seen. On August 15, Timmons drafted a report to the Lauderdale County office. Summary: no body found. Evidence includes beer can, child's shoe, DA, engraved lighter, strange tire tracks. Sole witness: Evie states Charles was at house pre-disappearance. Potential suspect: Charles Anderson, Louisiana resident. However, without direct evidence or DNA confirmation, the case couldn't proceed to criminal charges. File temporarily classified missing person suspicious circumstances. Timmons kept a personal note in his journal. Charles possibly involved. Motive unclear. David loses control when drinking, not ruled out. Monitor. He requested all evidence be retained in county storage, and scheduled follow-up interviews, if Charles returned to Meridian. In the final summary of the initial investigation phase, he wrote, "Lack of concrete evidence. No prosecution possible." As the file temporarily closed, rain fell again over Meridian skies. Out on the river, waters rose, washing away whatever remained of that afternoon. In the office, The nearly 100-page report was stapled shut with a red stamp. The Miles Anderson case officially shifted to pending status, a question mark hanging amid mismatched numbers and statements. 2 weeks after the search ended, the town of Meridian began to stir. The Meridian Star published an article titled, "Police Question Father in Missing Child Case," causing rumors to spread quickly through coffee shops, churches, and gas stations. People said David Anderson, the father who often drank, might have caused an accident in a drunken stupor. Some colleagues at the mill said he often drank during work hours and was quick to anger. No one saw him harm his son, but bad reputation spread faster than any evidence. Investigator Earl Timmons reopened the interrogation. Mary was invited to the police station. The time clock at the clinic where she worked showed she left her shift at 4:15, nearly an hour earlier than her initial statement. When asked, Mary explained that she went home to prepare dinner, her voice tired but calm. Timmons noted minor discrepancy in departure time from workplace, but did not consider it a lie. The same day, he interrogated David. The man was disheveled, reeking of beer, repeating that his brother had only stopped by briefly and left before 6 in the evening. But a witness at Tom's place said they saw David at the bar around 9 p.m., right when the rescue team was still searching by the river. They might have been mistaken, David said, avoiding the police's gaze. Amid public opinion piling on the father, a new detail emerged. A resident named Henry Dawes, who lived near Trinity Baptist Church, reported that that night he saw a faint orange glow from the storage shed area behind the church, just a few hours after the disappearance was reported. He thought someone was burning trash, so he didn't report it right away. Timmons immediately went to check with 2 officers. The wooden back door was charred, and inside the shed were only ash remnants, a few rusted cans, and old electrical wires. He had photos taken and ash samples collected. The test results showed components of wood and cotton fabric, no organic traces. However, Timmons marked in his notebook, "Need to recheck this location if the case expands." The shed was just over a mile from the Anderson house, right on the road to the river, close enough to be suspicious. Meanwhile, Charles Anderson, David's brother, nearly vanished. The phone number he provided in Louisiana was no longer active, and letters sent were returned. Bank records showed he withdrew all his savings 3 days after the disappearance. When Timmons contacted him, Charles replied curtly, "I don't know anything, don't call again." Police couldn't force him, because he was out of state. Neighbors continued to provide scattered accounts. Mrs. Dorothy Miller said that afternoon, she heard arguing from the Andersons' backyard, a man's voice mixed with a child's, then it went silent. A teenager from the row houses behind reported seeing a beige pickup truck leaving the neighborhood at dusk. Both accounts matched the Chevrolet C10 model identified in the police report, but no one remembered the license plate. Timmons compiled the facts: the alcoholic father, the mother leaving work early, the uncle who disappeared, and the mysterious fire in the shed. Everything suggested suspicion, but there was no direct evidence. Superiors ordered the investigation paused until new findings. In the report sent to Lauderdale County, he wrote, "The case has elements of suspicion within the family. Currently no basis for prosecution." In September 1975, as oak leaves began falling onto the surface of the Tombigbee River, the investigation was suspended. Public opinion turned indifferent. David lost his job, spending most of his time drinking. Mary went out less, and Evie took a break from school due to teasing. Charles did not return to Meridian. One night, Timmons sat back in his office, reviewing the entire file. On his desk were 3 photos, beer can, tire tracks, and the charred shed. 3 pieces that didn't fit together, but intuition made him feel the story wasn't over. He crossed out the last line in his notebook, "Insufficient evidence for indictment, but the fire in the shed needs to be remembered if the case is reopened." The case gradually cooled, leaving only pages of files thick with numbers and an unanswered question: where did the 3-year-old boy disappear to in the quiet afternoon of that summer. In early 1976, after months with no progress, the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office officially closed the file on Miles Anderson's disappearance. On the cover of the file was stamped "Missing Child, Suspicious Circumstances. Case inactive until new evidence arises." All physical evidence, the small shoe, Budweiser beer can, and lighter engraved DA was sealed and moved to evidence storage locker #43. Investigator Earl Timmons signed the log, carefully labeling it with the date. Deep down, he knew this case wasn't truly over, but there were no more resources to continue. David Anderson's reputation in town plummeted. At the auto shop, colleagues avoided assigning him work, and customers didn't want to leave their cars with him for repairs. Public opinion branded him as the father who killed his son, and denied it, even though police lacked evidence. Isolated and drowning in alcohol, David became listless, often showing up at Tom's place until late at night. In the spring of 1977, he was fired. Shortly after, he packed his things and drove his pickup truck out of Meridian, without telling anyone. 2 weeks later, police found his truck abandoned on a small bridge over the Tombigbee River, door open, keys still in the ignition. No signs of struggle, no body. The newspapers reported it briefly: "Father of missing boy believed dead." The case was noted: "Possible suicide, body not found." After that, Mary nearly withdrew from social life. She sold the old house and moved to a suburb south of Meridian. She didn't remarry, had little interaction, only attending church on weekends. Neighbors said she still lit a lamp by the window facing the river in the evenings, as if waiting for something. Evie grew up quietly, taking her mother's last name, rarely mentioning her father or brother. The disappearance gradually became something people only brought up in morning coffee chats. The 3-year-old vanished, and then the father followed. In 1982, during an evidence locker inventory, staff discovered that the sealed bag containing a piece of fabric from the scene was missing. The internal report stated simply, "Item #14 missing during audit." No further search. Timmons had transferred to another department by then, and the Miles Anderson file was buried deeper in the archives. When he retired in the early 1990s, he took a copy of the case home, filing it away in an old cabinet with a few other unsolved cases. In the 1990s and 2000s, DNA technology began to be applied, but the Anderson case was too old, with scant samples, and no one proposed reopening it. The riverbank land was leveled, and Trinity Baptist Church expanded with a new storage area. All physical traces of the case were swallowed by time. Occasionally, when the river receded, people found odd objects: a piece of wood, animal bones, a rusted toy, then forgot about them when lab results came back, unrelated. Mary still lived in Meridian. Every year she wrote to the police department, asking if there was new information, and each time she received the same reply: no progress. The young officers at the station didn't even know the case had ever existed. By 2020, when the city planned to demolish the old row of sheds behind Trinity Baptist Church to build a new community center, no one expected that inside those damp, moldy wooden walls still lay a forgotten piece of evidence: a rusted metal box containing the final traces of a story buried for nearly half a century. The Miles Anderson disappearance became a textbook cold case. No body, no suspect, no one left to remember, just faded file pages and thick dust covering 3 barely legible words: "Case inactive." In March 2025, Meridian had changed. The old shed behind Trinity Baptist Church, abandoned for decades, was slated for renovation into a community room. During the morning demolition, worker Ray Holbrook heard the hammer strike something hollow and metallic inside the wooden wall. When the plank was removed, they discovered a dust-covered metal box webbed with spider silk, faintly engraved with the numbers 1975 on the lid. The site supervisor found it odd, and called the Meridian police. The crime scene techs arrived to examine it. When they opened the box, they saw 4 items inside: a tin toy car engraved MA, a rusted Budweiser beer can, a silver ring, and a yellowed envelope, labeled, "For Mary, D.A." Police documented it, took photos and sealed it. An older officer on the team recognized that M.A. might match the 1975 disappearance of Miles Anderson, the child the whole town had gossiped about for a time. The news was reported to the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office. The next day, all the evidence was sent to the Mississippi State Crime Lab in Jackson. When scanning the beer can's surface, technicians detected a dried brown streak near the rim that tested positive for hemoglobin. DNA analysis showed the sample belonged to an adult male, not a child. Comparing it to the CODIS database, the results returned a partial match to an unidentified person's profile from Louisiana in the 1980s. The preliminary report's final note: adult male DNA, possibly related to Meridian 1975 case. The news quickly reached command. The Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office called a meeting and assigned the case to Detective Laura Briggs, a 38-year-old investigator specializing in cold cases. Briggs had solved a 1989 disappearance using DNA tech and had spearheaded the county's old file review program. Engraved on the toy car and "For Mary, D.A." on the envelope, she immediately recognized the link to the Miles Anderson case. Briggs requested access to the old archives. In the damp basement of the county building, staff located a box labeled, "Anderson, Miles, Missing Child 1975. Inside were crime scene photos, investigator Earl Timmons' reports, and an evidence list: child's shoe, beer can, lighter engraved DA. Evidence locker #43. It all matched. There was also an area map with a note: fire in shed behind Trinity Church, unchecked. This caught Briggs's eye. She requested a cross-check of shed ownership in the 1970s. The results showed the shed was under Meridian Electric Company's use from 1974 to 1980. The old employee roster still listed a familiar name: Charles Anderson, maintenance technician. David's brother, who had vanished from Meridian right after the disappearance. A photocopy of the employment contract was faded, but legible with the name and signature. Briggs marked it in red, noting beside it, "Contact Louisiana." Meanwhile, the forensics team completed their analysis. Dust and paint on the metal box indicated it had been hidden in the wall around the late 1970s, after the case closed. The envelope paper and ink in the "For Mary, D.A." letter matched Parker ink, produced in 1976, the time David was presumed dead. That meant someone had held onto the evidence for a few years after the disappearance before burying it. On March 12, Briggs submitted an official report recommending reopening the Miles Anderson, 1975 file. In the proposal, she cited 3 reasons: new physical evidence, adult DNA different from the victim, and personnel ties to Charles Anderson. Superiors approved it the same day, officially reopening the case after nearly half a century. A brief press release went out: new evidence discovered in 1975 missing child case. Investigation reopened. Local papers ran it, calling it a shocking event after 50 years of silence. At Meridian PD headquarters, Briggs pinned a photo of the tin toy car to the whiteboard, next to a map of the Tombigbee River and shed photos. She circled Charles Anderson, Louisiana in red marker, then wrote below, "Reopen. Priority high." Outside the window, spring rain fell lightly, but inside the room, a case thought dead with time began to come alive, sparked by a rusted metal box behind the old wall of the Trinity Baptist shed. After the reinvestigation order was signed, Detective Laura Briggs set to work reviewing the entire Miles Anderson case file. On her desk was a stack of yellowed documents, the edges speckled with water stains, and the typewriter ink blurred. Each page bore the stamp of the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Department, 1975. Briggs sorted them in sequence: missing person report, witness statements, crime scene photos, evidence logs. Every detail matched what had been found in the metal box at the Trinity Baptist warehouse, the Budweiser beer can, the initials, DA, and the toy car. She read the investigator Earl Timmons' report carefully and paused at the section unusual tire tracks, not matching family vehicle. In the crime scene photo file, one shot captured tire impressions in the mud near the backyard fence. Under magnification, the tread pattern belonged to the zigzag type on early 1970s Chevrolet C10 tires. Briggs checked the archived vehicle database in that year's records. Only a few of this type were registered in Mississippi, and one of them belonged to Charles Anderson, address Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The detail matched perfectly with the brother mentioned in the old file. Briggs pulled up the 1975 Meridian map, marking 3 points: the Anderson family home, the Tombigbee River bank, and the Trinity Baptist Church grounds, where the metal box had been found. The distance was just over a mile, close enough to traverse in minutes. Someone familiar with the area could come and go easily without drawing notice. She noted, perpetrator may have known the route or worked in the area. In the Polaroid crime scene photos, she spotted an overlooked detail in the corner of the frame. Far back by the fence, there was the shadow of a man in a striped shirt, wearing a baseball cap, standing at an angle toward the camera. There was no notation about this person in the report. Briggs compared it to the old family photo of David and Charles at the workshop, both wearing similar shirts. Placing the two images side by side, the posture and shoulder width nearly matched. She wrote in the margin, possibility Charles was present at the scene. Briggs turned to Evie's statement from the little girl in the file. She read Timmons' handwritten note. Evie saw Uncle Charles holding Miles before supper. The line was lightly crossed out, but still legible. Meanwhile, Charles claimed he had left Meridian that morning, a clear contradiction. Timmons had suggested re-interviewing, but the file had no follow-up notes. It seemed the second meeting never happened. That afternoon, Briggs had the administrative department assist in researching ownership of the Trinity Baptist warehouse from 1974-1980. The results showed it had been leased by Meridian Electric Company for storing supplies. In the old employee list from the company, there was the name Charles Anderson, maintenance technician. When she saw the name, Briggs paused her pen, underlining it 3 times. The man who had worked at the warehouse, where the evidence was hidden, was David Anderson's brother. She opened the Louisiana vehicle registration data and found the record for a beige Chevrolet C10, license plate issued in 1973, owner Charles Anderson. The truck had been sold to a scrap dealer in 1980. That aligned with the time the metal box could have been buried in the wall. Every fact was coming together, like old puzzle pieces finding their place. Briggs noted on the investigation board, vehicle location, personnel match. That evening, she contacted the Baton Rouge Police Department. After a few hours, they sent back residency records. Charles was now 78, living alone, formerly an electrician for small businesses, no criminal record, but in 1981, he had been questioned in a bar assault case. The victim had described the perpetrator carrying a lighter engraved DA, the same item from the Anderson case. When she read that, Briggs realized the connection stretched from Mississippi to Louisiana over half a century. The next morning, she went to the county archives, requesting digital scanning restoration of the crime scene photos. The enhanced image showed the man in the striped shirt in the Polaroid standing closer to the fence than previously estimated, facing toward the back door of the house, where Miles was last seen. The tall, lean silhouette, and the way he held his cap, matched Charles's 1974 photo. Briggs saved the image to the new electronic file coded Case 75, Yarrow 41, reopened 2025. That afternoon, she drafted a report for her superiors. The summary included 4 key points. Adult DNA on the beer can did not belong to David Anderson. Tire tracks at the scene matched Charles Anderson's vehicle. Polaroid photo showed shadow of a man in a striped shirt, consistent with Charles's appearance. Charles had worked at the Trinity warehouse, where the evidence was hidden. Briggs concluded, based on new evidence, there is grounds to identify Charles Anderson as directly involved in the 1975 disappearance of Miles Anderson. Recommend identity verification and DNA sampling in Louisiana. Before leaving the office, she pinned the Polaroid photo to the board, next to the tin toy car, MA and the Tombigbee River map. At the bottom of the board, a sheet of paper read in 3 clear lines. 1975, the child vanished. 2025, the truth emerges. Target, Charles Anderson. Briggs turned off the light. In the faint glow remaining from the hallway, the old photo of the man in the striped shirt caught the light, as if the past had just stirred slightly, preparing to step out of the half-century shadow. After completing the file review, Detective Laura Briggs focused on the most critical phase, re-examining the 1975 evidence using modern forensic technology. She contacted the Mississippi State Forensics Lab in Jackson to open evidence locker 43, where the original items from the Miles Anderson disappearance were stored. The faded old sealed bags were pulled from the shelf, the labels peeling, the handwriting nearly gone. Inside were the Budweiser beer can, the small shoe, the lighter engraved DA, and a clump of dry dirt from the Anderson yard. Briggs requested priority processing of the beer can, the most important evidence. The technicians used superfine magnetic powder combined with infrared scanning to recover fingerprints. The results showed a clear pattern still on the can's body. When entered into the AFI system, it matched the biometric record of Charles Anderson, sampled during the 1981 Baton Rouge interrogation. 99.4% match. No prints matched David Anderson. The report concluded succinctly, fingerprint match. Charles Anderson. Briggs knew this was the first evidence confirming Charles had handled the item at the scene. Next she requested analysis of the newly found tin toy car, MA, from the metal box. The lab recovered a few epithelial cells stuck between the wheel spokes. DNA analysis showed the sample matched perfectly with Evie Anderson's genetic profile, Miles's sister, stored in the state database since 2012. This result confirmed the car was genuinely Miles's, proving the metal box contained original evidence, not a fabrication. The next step was examining the letter for Mary, D.A. The forensics lab used Raman spectroscopy and ink chromatography analysis. The ink was identified as produced in 1976, after the case closed, and after David was presumed dead. The envelope paper was the type sold in Baton Rouge during 1976, 1978. Briggs requested handwriting comparison of the letter to Charles's signature from old personnel records. The stroke analysis software yielded a match on 18 points. The report stated, high probability, same author. The letter was determined to be forged as David, likely written by Charles to mislead. Briggs pinned the results to the whiteboard. In the center was the Polaroid photo of the man in the striped shirt, surrounded by 3 bolded results: beer can, Charles Anderson fingerprint, toy car, Evie Anderson DNA, Miles's genuine evidence, handwritten letter written in 1976, ink handwriting matches Charles. 3 separate results but all pointing in one direction. Charles was at the scene and had deliberately fabricated evidence to frame David. Briggs wrote the summary in her notebook: David Anderson framed, Charles Anderson likely perpetrator. She sent the preliminary report to her superiors with a recommendation to expand the investigation to Louisiana for current DNA sampling from Charles to compare with the bloodstain on the beer can. In the assessment section, she wrote, forensic results exclude David Anderson from suspects and indicate evidence tampering to conceal criminal activity. That evening, Briggs sat alone in the office. On the desk were 3 new file envelopes, each carrying timestamps from different eras but telling a unified story. The light reflected off the 1974 photo of brothers Charles and David when everything was still peaceful. Now the evidence silent for 50 years had spoken, confirming the old investigator's hunch, Earl Timmons, that this case was never an accident. Briggs looked at the evidence board. In the middle the line she had just written in red pen: Charles present, David framed. Below, she added the final note in her investigation journal: technology changes, but truth doesn't. It just waits for someone patient enough to listen. As she turned off the light and left the office, the old evidence was placed back in new sealed boxes, labeled Ripon 2025. The Miles Anderson case officially entered a completely different chapter, from an unsolved disappearance to a concealed murder spanning half a century, and the only name still standing in the shadows was Charles Anderson. The new forensic results provided sufficient grounds for Detective Laura Briggs to expand the investigation. The next target was confirming the link between Charles Anderson and the Trinity Baptist warehouse, where the metal box hiding evidence had been found. According to Lauderdale County Archives, from 1974-1980, this warehouse area had been leased by Meridian Electric Company for storing supplies. Briggs requested a trace of the employee list from that period. The next day, the administrative office sent a copy of the old contract, Charles Anderson, maintenance technician. The print was faint, but clear enough to confirm. Briggs arrived at the scene with 2 technicians. The row of old sheds sat tucked behind the church, walls of rotted wood, rusted tin roof, the air thick with damp and dust. The area was cordoned off for thorough surveying. As she stepped inside, she noticed the southwest corner foundation, where the metal box was found, had a slight depression, the concrete newer than the rest. She photographed it, marked it, and requested ground-penetrating radar (GPR) scanning for the next day. Before proceeding, Briggs met with Herman Dawes, 79, who had been a warehouse guard in 1975. He lived in a Meridian nursing home. When she mentioned the Anderson disappearance, his eyes lit up. Dawes recounted that night, after the town buzzed with news of the missing child, he saw Charles drive a truck to the warehouse near dusk. He carried a long wooden crate, like a tool chest. Dawes said, and there was smoke that night. I thought he was burning trash. The next morning, he returned to find the back door still smoky, but no one investigated. Dawes had never told because he feared getting involved. Back then, everyone believed it was just a drowning. This statement prompted Briggs to immediately record and witness sign it. The next morning, the state forensics tech team arrived at the warehouse for GPR scanning. The images showed an anomalous reflective area in the southwest corner, about 80 centimeters deep, a rectangular void. Briggs obtained a warrant for excavation, and had that section of foundation broken up. Beneath the cracked concrete, they found dark soil and numerous charred material fragments. One technician spotted a partially burned black cloth scrap, faint red specks, like dried blood, and a small rusted cylindrical metal piece. The samples were sent for rapid testing at the mobile lab. Results: the red stains tested positive for human hemoglobin, and the metal fragments' composition matched the aluminum tin alloy used in 1970s Budweiser cans. Briggs requested all samples sealed and coded GPR 1975. Meanwhile, the lab confirmed the DNA in the blood stain carried genetic markers, similar to the adult male DNA from the beer can in the metal box, the same person. As the GPR continued scanning, the device detected 2 more small reflective points near the back door, less than half a meter deep. One had a uniform circular shape, about 8 inches in diameter, matching a can base. The technicians suspected this was the original burial spot for the evidence before it was hidden in the wall. Briggs documented it, and had full scene photos taken. That evening, at the Meridian PD office, she laid out all the evidence on the investigation board. At the center was the Trinity warehouse photo, beside it a Meridian map connecting 3 points: Anderson House, Tombigbee River, Trinity Warehouse. In the bottom right corner, she taped a young Charles photo, and noted, worked at warehouse at time of case. Present night of August 8, 1975. Dawes' statement: DNA samples and evidence match Anderson house scene. Briggs circled the words, warehouse =, secondary crime scene. The physical traces, blood, burned cloth, can alloy, proved this wasn't a random hiding spot, but an intentional disposal site. The next morning, she presented the report to the chief. In the summary, Briggs stated, Charles Anderson confirmed employed at Trinity Warehouse in 1975. Eyewitness saw him arrive at warehouse night of disappearance, carrying wooden crate. GPR scan results detected void, recovered material matching scene DNA, and can alloy. Inference: Trinity Warehouse was site for storing or destroying evidence, directly linked to Miles Anderson's disappearance. The report ended with a recommendation to expand investigation to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for current DNA sampling from Charles for comparison. That night, Briggs sat in the dim room, the faint light shining on the evidence board. She used a red pen to draw another line from the Trinity warehouse back to the Anderson house, the words written beside it. Charles, link confirmed. Outside the window, the old warehouse stood silent in the dark. There, amid the cracked concrete and old smoke smell, the secrets buried half a century ago were gradually taking shape. The Anderson case was no longer a disappearance, but a sophisticated cover-up journey, starting right from the place where Charles had worked. After matching the DNA and fingerprints at the Trinity warehouse, Detective Laura Briggs directed the investigation to Louisiana, where Charles Anderson had lived for many years. She sent a request to the Baton Rouge Police Department to retrieve criminal records from the 1975-1985 period. The results showed that in 1981, Charles had been briefly detained in an assault case at Riverside Tavern Bar, but was released because the victim refused to press charges. Briggs requested a copy of the file. The report stated, victim Harold Nunez, 42 years old, claimed he was attacked by a tall, skinny man with graying hair using a beer bottle after an argument. The detail that caught Briggs' attention was the statement, he had a silver lighter engraved with DA, kept flicking it open constantly while talking. Immediately, she recognized this as the evidence from the 1975 Meridian case, the lighter belonging to David Anderson. Briggs contacted Lieutenant Sanders, who was in charge of old records storage in Baton Rouge. He retrieved the envelope for case hash 81974 and sent her a scan of Charles's mugshot from the time of his arrest, a thin face, high nose bridge, deep-set eyes, matching the 1974 photo from the Meridian file. In the property inventory from the arrest, the police listed one silver Zippo engraved DA, one plain silver ring. After his release, both items were returned to Charles. Briggs printed the photo and placed it next to the evidence found at the Trinity warehouse, the silver ring and the beer can. The engraving style, size and wear on the ring all matched the one David had worn in family photos. She concluded, Charles kept his brother's personal items for at least 6 years after David disappeared. To confirm, Briggs asked Baton Rouge to compare the serial number on the lighter if it was still there. The next day, Sanders sent back a magnified photo of the Zippo's lid, engraved with DA in handwriting identical to the lighter recovered from the Meridian scene. Briggs wrote in her report, possession of victim's property post-disappearance, material evidence linking Charles to David. Based on the genetic data, she determined that David likely hadn't committed suicide as the 1977 file suggested, but had been murdered. Charles carrying David's lighter and ring proved he had accessed or disposed of his brother after Miles's disappearance. Briggs added a note to the investigation board, David likely murdered, cover-up of prior crime. To strengthen it, Briggs went to meet Evie Anderson, Miles's aunt, who now lived in Biloxi. When shown the lighter photo, Evie confirmed, that's my father's. He always carried it, said it was a wedding gift from Mom. The confirmation made the hypothesis even more solid. Charles couldn't have obtained the item legitimately. The Baton Rouge Forensics Department later provided a copy of the fingerprints taken when Charles was detained in 1981. Compared to the sample preserved on the beer can from the Meridian scene, the results were a complete match. The report affirmed, full fingerprint match, Charles Anderson. Now Charles was placed at both locations, Meridian in 1975 and Baton Rouge in 1981, with the same evidence in hand. Briggs compiled the chain of facts. Charles investigated for assault in 1981 in Baton Rouge. Victim described silver lighter engraved DA, mugshot and fingerprints match Meridian file. Charles possessed David's personal property years after he disappeared. Preliminary conclusion, David likely killed to silence him after witnessing the boy's death. In the office, Briggs pinned the lighter photo, the ring, and Charles's 1981 mugshot to the whiteboard, connecting them with red string to Meridian. The line she wrote at the bottom, "He kept the evidence because he kept the guilt." Every piece pointed to one conclusion: Charles hadn't just killed his nephew to hide a mistake, but had also eliminated his own brother, the one who knew too much. Outside, a light rain fell over Baton Rouge night. Briggs sat by the window, watching the lights reflect on the desk covered in files. After nearly 50 years, the lighter engraved DA had finally illuminated what all the old reports had overlooked. The brother from back then hadn't just carried the crime of hiding a body, he carried the evidence in his pocket, living calmly for half a century, until the truth rose from the dusty files. After the results from Baton Rouge confirmed Charles Anderson had kept his brother's evidence, Detective Laura Briggs requested a surveillance warrant for him in Louisiana. Charles, now 78 years old, lived alone in a small house in the southern suburbs of Baton Rouge. Neighbors said he kept to himself, driving every morning to Magnolia Diner for coffee, and to read the paper with black coffee. Briggs knew this was the perfect opportunity to collect a DNA sample without direct contact. The Mississippi investigation team coordinated with Baton Rouge police. 2 officers sat in a surveillance vehicle in the parking lot across from the diner. On the first morning, they filmed Charles entering, ordering coffee, and sitting at his usual table by the window. When he left, a technician quickly collected the cup and napkin he'd discarded, sealing them in a bag labeled Sample BR25. Everything went smoothly, without drawing attention. The sample was shipped to the Mississippi State Lab. 3 days later, the DNA report arrived for Briggs. The genetic sequence matched 100% with the adult male blood sample found on the beer can and in the soil at the Trinity warehouse. The conclusion in bold: DNA match. Charles Anderson. Briggs knew they had the final proof. After nearly 50 years, every clue converged on one man. She immediately requested a federal arrest warrant. On the morning of May 21, 2025, in the misty dawn, the Baton Rouge Task Force along with U.S. Marshals approached the small house. Briggs was on site, the door opened, and Charles stood on the porch in a gray shirt, his face calm. When the warrant was read, he didn't resist, just said softly, "It's about the Meridian thing, isn't it?" and extended his hands for the cuffs. In his shirt pocket, police recovered the silver lighter engraved D, the familiar piece of evidence from 1975. At the Baton Rouge station, Briggs witnessed Charles's initial interrogation. He remained silent, only requesting a lawyer. Though he said nothing, the presence of the lighter and the DNA results carried enough weight. She noted in her log, "Subject showed no reaction when Miles or David mentioned," that indicated he knew exactly why he was arrested. The next day, under U.S. Marshals' supervision, Charles was transported back to Mississippi. The prisoner transport van crossed Highway 55 through a light drizzle. Briggs sat in the front seat, glancing in the rearview mirror at the old man with his head bowed, cuffed hands on his knees, silent the whole way. To her it wasn't just an arrest, it was the end of a nearly half-century journey to recover the truth for a child. In Meridian, Charles was taken to Lauderdale County Jail. The press quickly reported, 1975 cold case solved, suspect arrested in Baton Rouge. Locals were stunned. Many elders recalled the story of the missing boy they'd thought forgotten. In front of the cameras, Briggs said only, "Justice may be late, but it still comes." That evening in the office, she finalized the report, May 14, 2025, surveillance on Charles in Baton Rouge. 5/15 DNA sample collected from cup and napkin. 5/18 results match 1975, blood sample. 5/21 arrest successful, DA lighter seized. 5/22 transported to Mississippi for interrogation. Briggs closed the file, adding the final line, "Charles Anderson." 50 years later, back where it began. Outside, the rain had stopped, humid cool air filling through the open window. She watched the streetlights reflect on the wet pavement, and thought some cases don't die with time, They just need someone to keep listening to the voice of truth, and eventually, they're named. On the morning of May 23, 2025, after a night in custody at Lauderdale County Jail, Charles Anderson was brought to the second-floor interrogation room at the Meridian Police Department. The narrow room had pale gray walls, a cold metal table, and white lights shining directly down on the seating area. Detective Laura Briggs and Officer Earl Hammond handled the formal interrogation. Outside, the prosecutor observed through the two-way mirror. On the table were all the files, crime scene photos, DNA results, the beer can, and the lighter engraved DA. Phase 1, Denial. Briggs began in a low voice. "Do you know why you're here, Charles?" He sat straight, hands clasped, voice raspy. "I guess it's about the kid from back then. But it was just an accident." Briggs let him tell his story. "I went to David's house, drank a few beers. The kid was playing in the yard. When I left, he was fine. I didn't hurt anyone." Briggs opened the crime scene photos, pointing to the beer can. "Your fingerprints are here, and blood." Charles furrowed his brow slightly. "I cut my hand. It must have gotten on there from that." Briggs didn't react, just noted Denial's statement inconsistent. Phase 2, Confrontation. An hour later, Briggs began the confrontation. She placed the silver lighter on the table. This lighter was found at the scene in 1975, and an identical one on you when arrested in Baton Rouge, in 1981. Now you still have it. Explain. Charles looked at the evidence, lips pressed tight. "David gave it to me. We used to swap stuff." Briggs continued. "And the letter for Mary, D.A. Inc. dated 1976, after David was presumed dead. Handwriting matches yours." Charles responded slowly. "I just wanted to help Mary believe he was still alive." Briggs leaned in slightly. "No, you wanted everyone to believe David left, so they'd stop looking." Hammond recorded every word. Briggs methodically presented the chain of evidence: Charles's fingerprints on the beer can, DNA matching the blood at the Trinity warehouse, and David's personal items found in his possession. "It all leads to one person," she said. "Anything else you want to add?" Charles was silent, eyes weary. After a moment, he sighed. "I never meant to kill anyone." Phase 3, Confession. Briggs lowered her voice. "Tell it from the beginning. I want to know what really happened." Charles bowed his head, voice fading. "That afternoon, I carried Miles to the riverbank. He wanted to see the boats. I turned back to grab a beer. He ran up the embankment, slipped and fell. I didn't make it in time." He paused, breathing deeply. "I pulled him out. He wasn't breathing. I panicked, afraid David would blame me, afraid of getting caught. I took him to the Trinity warehouse, planned to bury him temporarily, and come back. Then I burned his stuff, the beer can, fabric scraps, to erase traces." Briggs nodded, letting Hammond record the statement. "And David?" she asked. Charles stared at the table. "A few days later, he came looking for me. He knew. He threatened to call the cops. We argued by the riverbank. He shoved me. I reacted. The knife in my pocket slipped." Briggs stayed silent. "Where did you hide the body?" "Right next to Miles," he said softly. "I wrapped them in canvas, buried them at the water's edge. After that, I wrote the fake letter, sent it to Mary so everyone thought David left." Briggs opened her notebook, repeating his words for confirmation, then asked, "Are you confessing voluntarily?" Charles nodded. Briggs slid the statement toward him. "Read it over, then sign if it's accurate." He took the pen, hand trembling, scrawled his signature at the bottom. "Charles R. Anderson, May 23, 2025. Hammond stamped it. Briggs left the room for a few minutes, handing a copy to the prosecutor. When she returned, Charles was still sitting, eyes sunken, voice hoarse. "I didn't think it had come to this. I just wanted to bury it all." Briggs replied softly, "And you did, for 50 years. Verification of statement. That afternoon, Briggs had the investigation team verify every detail. From old maps, they traced Charles's route, from the Anderson house to the river, then to the Trinity warehouse. Old gas station data nearby showed a beige Chevrolet C10, recorded passing at 7 p.m. on August 8, 1975, matching the time Charles said he left the scene. An elderly witness, living near the riverbank, confirmed hearing an argument and a vehicle engine leaving in the night. Tire tracks preserved in the file matched the size of Charles's truck. Forensics also examined an industrial knife found in his garage. The type was produced in the 1970s, blade length and wear matching the cuts on David's rib bones, noted in the preliminary exhumation report. The final verification report stated, "Statement consistent with physical evidence and independent investigative data. Likelihood of false confession, low." Briggs returned to the holding cell to report the verification results. Upon hearing, Charles showed no reaction, just said, "At least now they'll know the truth." Briggs looked at him, voice steady, "Yes, but truth doesn't save anyone, it just ends the lies." That evening, Briggs completed the interrogation summary report. Charles Anderson confessed to causing Miles's death by negligence, then murdering David to cover it up. Statement matches DNA evidence, tire tracks, and witness accounts. Confession signed voluntarily, with lawyer present. Conclusion: forward file to federal prosecutor for preparation of first-degree murder and evidence tampering charges. She added a final line to her investigation journal. After 50 years, the case has a confession. But justice isn't comfort. It's a reminder that truth always demands someone pay the price. Leaving the interrogation room, Briggs paused by the glass window. Inside, Charles sat alone, head bowed over the metal table, aged hands trembling slightly in the light. After half a century of burial, he had finally spoken it all. And out there where the Tombigbee River flowed, the buried secrets were rising with the water. 2 days after Charles Anderson's confession, the Mississippi State Forensics team began excavating along the Tombigbee River bank, at the exact location he described in the transcript. The site was in a downstream bend, where a stunted oak's roots protruded into the water, the marker Charles called Miles and David's spot. The area was cordoned off from early morning, with barriers and evidence preservation tents set up. Detective Laura Briggs oversaw the operation directly. Ground-penetrating radar, GPR, scanned the riverbank, yielding results of 2 parallel anomalous reflections, over a meter apart, about 80 centimeters deep. Briggs ordered manual digging. By late morning, the damp clay layer revealed the first skull fragment, small, delicate, and curved, clearly belonging to a child. About a step away, the forensics team uncovered an adult human skeleton, lying supine, arms crossed over the chest, both surrounded by layers of rotted dark brown canvas fabric. The scene fell into absolute silence as the 2 sets of remains were lifted from the earth. A rusted metal shard was found nearby, identical in material to Budweiser beer cans from the 1970s. Briggs stood motionless, scrutinizing the wrapping fabric. It matched the sample found in the Trinity Baptist warehouse. Every detail from Charles's statement was eerily accurate. Location, depth, materials. She murmured softly, "He didn't lie about this place." All specimens were sealed and transported to the Mississippi State Forensic Institute in Jackson. Technicians proceeded with bone reconstruction, extracting DNA samples from teeth and femurs. Preliminary results in just 48 hours confirmed the smaller remains were Miles Anderson, the 3-year-old missing victim from 1975. The larger were David Anderson, the father presumed to have committed suicide in 1977. DNA match with Evie Anderson, the surviving relative, reached 99.98%. The subsequent forensic report established preliminary causes of death. Miles's skull had a fracture from blunt force trauma, consistent with the statement about slipping and falling on the rocky bank. David's ribs bore a sharp stab wound, angle and depth matching the industrial knife found in Charles's garage. The findings fully corroborated the confession. On May 28, 2025, Briggs received the official DNA conclusion report. In the stark white room of the Forensic Institute, she read the first line, "Positive identification confirmed." It felt like all noise vanished. Half a century of searching ended with 2 numbers and 3 signatures. Father and son had lain quietly in the earth for 50 years, now returned their names. On May 30th, 2 small coffins were placed side by side in the Meridian funeral home. Evie Anderson, Miles's sister and the family's sole survivor, was invited by police for identification. Upon seeing the canvas fabric scrap and the silver ring taken from her father's hand, she said softly, "They're finally home." Police compiled the complete record, 2 sets of remains found at the exact location stated by Charles Anderson, both wrapped in canvas matching evidence from the Trinity warehouse. DNA confirmed identities of Miles and David Anderson, injuries consistent with the confession. When the report was forwarded to the Lauderdale County prosecutor, the case officially shifted from missing persons to first-degree murder. Charles Anderson was indicted on 2 counts of murder and corpse disposal. Local headlines blared, "A 1975 cold case, father and son found after 50 years. Meridian residents, who had witnessed that original search, gathered again by the riverbank, placing white flowers. That afternoon, Briggs returned to the scene. The river bend was quiet, cattails swaying in the weak sunlight. She stood before the stunted oak, where the mud had just been leveled, gazing at the flat water drifting by. No more machinery noise, only the steady sound of the current, like a long exhale from the earth after half a century of silence. Briggs entered the final line in her notebook, "Miles and David Anderson, found May 28, 2025. Justice doesn't come early or late, it comes when people find the courage to look back." The 2 coffins were lowered into the city cemetery that evening at dusk. For Briggs, the case wasn't entirely closed, but the truth had finally surfaced, resting on the water's face, no longer buried deep under the Tombigbee's mud. 3 days after the exhumation, all evidence was transferred to the Mississippi State Forensic Institute for detailed examination. Detective Laura Briggs was present as specialists compared wounds, tools and documents. The goal was to confirm the degree of match between Charles Anderson's confession and the physical evidence, the final step before prosecution. Remains of Miles Anderson, the forensic report stated clearly. The skull had an arc-shaped fracture on the left occipital region, nearly 6 centimeters long, with no signs of slashing or repeated impact. Impact force analysis indicated a fall from about 1.5 meters, equivalent to the Tombigbee Riverbank slope, perfectly matching the statement that Miles slipped and hit his head on a rock. No signs of strangulation or abuse. Conclusion: accident was the primary cause of death. The canvas fabric wrapping Miles's body was compared to the sample collected from the Trinity Baptist warehouse. Results showed complete matches in fiber weave and oil coating. Burn marks on the fabric edges had ash and soot composition identical to soil samples from the excavation site, proving Charles had burned items there, as per his statement. Remains of David Anderson. The adult skeleton had a 7.3 centimeters deep cut on the left rib, with sharp edges, directed upward from below. Comparison results showed the wound matched the industrial knife seized from Charles's garage. SEM electron microscopy confirmed the blade edge had a 17-degree wear angle, perfectly aligning with the bone cut marks. A small fracture on the left forearm indicated defensive reaction, corroborating Charles's description of a riverside scuffle. The report concluded, the murder weapon matches the knife owned by the suspect. Examination of the 4 Mary DA letter. The handwriting analysis lab used digital stroke analysis technology to compare the letter with Charles's 1974 contract signature and 2025 confession. Results showed 22 matching points, slant, letter spacing, and characteristic Y-loop. The ink was identified as Parker Quink, produced in 1976, after David's death. Official conclusion: the letter was written by Charles Anderson, not David Anderson. Thus the letter was fabricated evidence created by Charles to mislead, making David's wife believe he had left and halting the investigation. Motive analysis piecing together all facts. Investigators identified Charles's motive as three main factors: covering up the accident. After Miles's death due to negligence, Charles feared manslaughter or murder charges, and decided to dispose of the body. Avoiding capture, when David discovered it, Charles panicked, fearing loss of freedom, and attacked to silence him. Family conflict. From Evie's accounts and neighbors, the brothers' relationship was strained. David saw Charles as useless. Charles harbored inferiority. Accumulated resentment turned an accident into tragedy. The Psychological Analysis Unit reviewed the 1981 Baton Rouge records, confirming Charles's history of impulsivity and alcohol dependence, consistent with explosive behavior patterns in crisis. All facts corroborated the confession: initial actions unintentional, but the second killing deliberate to conceal the crime. Briggs summarized in her report to the prosecutor, Miles's skull fracture matches the fall description. David's stab wound matches the seized weapon. Handwritten letter proves Charles staged the scene. Motive: fear, personal conflict, and intent to conceal. In the conclusion, she wrote, scientific evidence fully validates the suspect's confession. The Anderson case meets all elements for prosecution of intentional murder and corpse disposal. That afternoon, Briggs stood in the evidence room, gazing at the now fully connected investigation board, red strings linking Miles and David's photos to Charles's image. Each line was a piece of evidence, each node a fragment of truth. All converged on one point: fear turning to crime. She closed the file, writing the final line in her investigation journal: truth sometimes doesn't need a confession, just cuts, fabric scraps, and old ink that still speaks. With the chain of perfectly matching evidence, the Anderson case officially closed the investigation phase. After half a century, the story of the missing father and child was reconstructed in the most precise and cold language: science. Charles Anderson's trial opened on September 12, 2025, at the Lauderdale County Courthouse in Meridian, Mississippi. After nearly half a century, the small town buzzed again over the case once buried. The courtroom was packed with locals, reporters, and weathered faces who had witnessed the 1975 search. In the front row, Detective Laura Briggs sat silently, watching the 78-year-old man in gray prison garb, the central figure in the case that had kept so many awake. Prosecution's opening statement. Prosecutor Jack Merrill approached the podium with a calm but firm voice. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is proof that justice can be delayed, but never denied." He summarized the events in 1975. 3-year-old Miles Anderson vanished. Father David was wrongly suspected and disappeared. Uncle Charles hid the truth for 50 years. Merrill pointed at the defendant. He let a family be destroyed, a town live in doubt, and 2 people lie under the earth. Evidence was projected on a large screen: Budweiser beer can with Charles's fingerprints, the For Mary, D.A. letter written in his own hand, DNA results confirming his blood at both scenes. Finally, images of the 2 exhumed skeletons by the Tombigbee River, wrapped in canvas from the warehouse where Charles worked. Merrill concluded, "We don't rely on speculation. Every fact, scientific, physical, and confessional, points to one man, Charles Anderson." Defense strategy. Defense attorney Marilyn Greaves focused on humanitarian factors, advanced age and memory decline. Mr. Anderson is 78, with heart disease and memory impairment. This wasn't the act of a deliberate killer, but a chain of mistakes from fear and panic. The child's death was an accident, the father's was a reaction in agitation. She requested leniency because the defendant has lived half a century under the punishment of his conscience. When allowed to speak, Charles bowed his head, voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to kill anyone. I was scared. I just wanted to bury it all and forget." Briggs watched him, no longer angry, just heavy-hearted. Witnesses and evidence. The prosecution called Evie Anderson, David's daughter, as a witness. The silver-haired woman trembled seeing the DA's silver lighter on the table. "My father always carried it. My mother waited for him her whole life, believing he was alive. Now I know he was killed by his own brother." The courtroom air grew suffocatingly still. Briggs took the stand next, detailing the investigation and confirming all evidence was legally collected and properly sealed. When the prosecutor asked, "What broke this case after 50 years?" she replied succinctly, "Because evidence never lies." Closing arguments. In closing, Merrill emphasized, age doesn't erase guilt. He lived 50 years in freedom, while 2 others lay underground. Justice can't be forgotten just because of time. Greaves countered, let him die in remorse, not behind bars. Punishing an old man won't bring back the victims. The jury retired to deliberate at 3 p.m. Outside, Briggs waited, hearing rain patter on the old courthouse roof. 3 hours later they returned, faces stern. Verdict. The foreman stood to read. After reviewing all evidence, the jury finds defendant Charles Anderson guilty of first-degree murder of David Anderson, and guilty of corpse disposal of Miles Anderson. The room fell silent. Merrill nodded slightly. Briggs gripped her notebook tightly. Charles closed his eyes, unresponsive. When asked for final words, he whispered, "I've been afraid my whole life." Not anymore. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole, to be served at Parchman Prison, Mississippi. The judge concluded, "Justice may come late, but it has come." After the trial outside, Meridian sky drizzled lightly. Press swarmed the prisoner transport van. Briggs stood under the awning, watching it drive away, her heart not relieved, just finally quiet after a half-century story. That evening, in her notebook she wrote, September 15, 2025, Charles Anderson sentenced to life without parole. Justice doesn't change the past, but it forces the truth to be acknowledged. On her desk, the Anderson case file was closed. After 50 years, that name was finally sealed with a verdict, and a small Mississippi town could begin to sleep easy. 1 week after the verdict was announced, Detective Laura Briggs returned to the Meridian PD office to complete the final report. The Anderson, Miles and David case file, 1975, was placed on her desk, nearly 800 pages thick, containing all the forensic results, interrogation transcripts, and photographs dusted with half a century of dust. She knew this was not just the end of a case, but the period marking the longest stretch in the investigative history of the state of Mississippi. Briggs began compiling all the data from the 11-month investigation, from the discovery of the metal box in the wall of the Trinity Baptist warehouse to Charles Anderson's sentencing to life in prison. On her computer screen, she opened the inventory list, 18 confirmed pieces of evidence, including the beer can, the DA lighter, the MA toy car, the canvas fabric scrap, the utility knife, the handwritten letter, and DNA samples from the Trinity warehouse and the Tombigbee River bank. Each piece of evidence had a chain of custody seal, independent verification, and clear DNA matching. She typed the final note, "All evidence corroborated, full chain of custody preserved." Next she reviewed the list of 6 key witnesses: Herman Dawes, the 1975 warehouse guard, the first person to see Charles arrive at the warehouse with the wooden crate; Evie Anderson, David's daughter, a family witness confirming her father and brother's belongings; Harold Nunez, the victim of the 1981 Baton Rouge assault, describing the DA lighter; Lieutenant Sanders, Baton Rouge police archivist, providing records and mugshots of Charles; Earl Hammond, Meridian PD officer, direct witness to the interrogation and recorder of the confession; Mississippi State forensic specialist, confirming DNA matches, the murder weapon, and the handwritten letter. Briggs compiled the statements from each one, marking the intersecting timelines like a woven net, no gaps left between evidence and testimony. Everything matched, consistent and without any deviations in sequence. That afternoon, she completed the final investigative summary. In the conclusion section, Briggs wrote, "After 50 years, the disappearance of Miles Anderson has been resolved through a combination of physical evidence, modern DNA technology, and the suspect's confession. All evidence has been authenticated, witnesses corroborated, and the verdict rendered. Official file status transferred, solved." When the word "solved" appeared on the Lauderdale County Police Department system, the entire office fell silent for a few seconds. One of the longest cold case files in Mississippi state history had finally been closed. Briggs saved the digital copy, signed the hard copy, then stamped a red "closed" on the file cover. News spread quickly. The Meridian Star ran a bold headline, "Longest cold case in Mississippi, finally solved, after 50 years." Local TV stations replayed a short news segment, showing footage of the metal box discovered in the wall, then Briggs leaving the courthouse after the trial. Meridian residents gathered in front of the police station, leaving flowers under the sign, which had become a symbol of Justice's perseverance over the past several months. That evening, as the office emptied, Briggs tidied her desk. The wallboard was still covered in pushpins and red string. She removed the final photo, the small image of Miles taken in 1975, placed it in an envelope, and wrote on the outside, "Return to family." In the yellow lamplight, she looked at her hands, which had flipped through hundreds of file pages, touched each aged piece of evidence, brushed away layers of time's dust to uncover the truth. Before leaving, Briggs opened her notebook and wrote the case's final line, "Case closed, Anderson investigation." Meridian, Mississippi, October 2025. The truth never grows old, it only waits for someone brave enough to call it by name. She turned off the lights, closed the office door. Outside, the town of Meridian had grown more peaceful. After half a century, the forgotten child and the wrongly accused father had finally been restored their honor. While Charles Anderson's name was reduced to a short line in the criminal record, convicted. Life sentence, no parole. On October 12, 2025, exactly 1 month after the verdict was announced, the town of Meridian held a solemn memorial ceremony at Trinity Baptist Church, the former epicenter of the case. The church gates were draped with a white banner reading, "In memory of Miles and David Anderson, 1975-2025. Hundreds of residents attended, including retired officers, local students, and reporters who had covered the case. On the lawn in front of the church, 2 large frames of Miles and David stood side by side, surrounded by bouquets of white daisies and candles flickering gently in the autumn breeze. Detective Laura Briggs stood at the end of the row of seats, in civilian clothes, without her badge. For her, this was not just a memorial, but a final farewell to the case that had consumed nearly a year of her life. As the choir sang the hymn "Amazing Grace," many in the congregation bowed their heads, tears streaming down their faces. At the podium, Evie Anderson, now nearly 60, walked slowly to the microphone. She clutched a sheet of paper tightly, her voice trembling but clear. "For nearly 50 years, my family lived in the shadow of suspicion. My father was wrongly accused, my brother forgotten. Today, thanks to the perseverance of those who never gave up, we can say that the truth has been returned to us." She paused, looking toward the row where Briggs sat. "On behalf of the family, I thank the Lauderdale County Police Department, especially Detective Briggs, who not only found the perpetrator, but restored my father's honor. Justice came late, but it came." Applause erupted, mingled with sobs. Briggs bowed her head, feeling her throat tighten. In that moment, all the exhaustion, sleepless nights, and months immersed in thick files, melted away. Outside, the city cemetery had been adorned anew. The 2 new graves of Miles and David Anderson lay side by side, their headstones engraved with the simple words, "Finally home." Many residents brought flowers to lay there, including some who had once doubted David years ago. An elderly former gas station owner said quietly, "We owe him an apology." Newspapers across Mississippi ran stories on the ceremony. The Clarion Ledger headlined, "Justice delayed, not denied. Mississippi cold case solved, after 50 years." The article described the case as a symbol of faith and justice, and the power of modern forensic science. TV stations replayed images of Briggs standing by the old files, intercut with scenes of the Tombigbee River bank and the Trinity Baptist warehouse, where it all began. The State Department of Justice also sent a commendation letter to the investigative team, recognizing the longest case resolution in Mississippi history. In the press release, they called it a testament to the spirit of never closing the book until it's solved, not sealing the file until the truth is found. That evening, at a small riverside cafe, Briggs sat with colleague Earl Hammond. The two stared silently at the lights, reflecting on the water, where secrets had been buried for half a century. Hammond said softly, "I've seen a lot of cases, but none has left me feeling this relieved." Briggs smiled, because this wasn't just work, it was redeeming the honor of someone who was lost. An elderly waiter approached, recognizing them from the papers, and said quietly, "Thank you for bringing peace back to this town." Briggs just nodded, saying nothing. The next morning, the Meridian Star published a long editorial titled, "The Anderson Case. A Town Redeemed." The piece read, "The story is not just about crime and punishment, it's a lesson in collective memory, that justice can sleep in files, but will be awakened when someone is persistent enough to seek it." At the police station, the Anderson case file was displayed in the Cold Case Unit Memorial Room. On the cover, the red Solve stamp stood out, below it a photo of Miles David, and a handwritten note from Briggs. "Justice delayed is not justice denied." That afternoon, Briggs left the station and walked along the Tombigbee River bank. The water was still, the sun dipping behind the willow groves. She stopped by the gnarled oak, the marker that had once led them to the burial site years ago. She placed a white daisy there, and whispered, "Rest easy, it's all over now." A gentle wind blew, carrying the scent of river water, and the chirp of late-season insects. In the pale golden sky, the lights of Meridian town began to flicker on. After 50 years, the Anderson case had not only closed a file, but sealed a chapter in the community's history, where justice arrived late, but still strong enough to heal unseen wounds. Sunset fell over the Tombigbee River, the water gleaming in shades of burnished copper. The river flowed lazily, serene as if it had never held a single secret. On the west bank, where the gnarled oak cast a long shadow, a light breeze stirred the cattails, and the earthy scent of mud spread through the air. There Detective Laura Briggs stood motionless, a small notebook in hand. She gazed at the rippling waves catching the fading light, where nearly half a century ago, 2 lives had been buried. In the distance, the bells of Trinity Baptist Church tolled 6 times, steady and low. Everything in the town had returned to normal. Clean brick streets, residents coming and going from the cafe, children playing near the riverside park. Only the river remained unchanged, flowing through the years with a silence that was almost eerie. Briggs closed her eyes softly. In her mind, every image of the case replayed like a film in slow motion. The metal box found in the wall, the rusted beer can, the silver lighter, and the trembling face of the old man in the interrogation room. She opened the notebook and read the final line she had once written, "The truth never gets lost. It only waits for someone patient enough to find it." That phrase, in the end, was still the most accurate summary of the case. Without DNA technology, without the tenacity of those who came before, those puzzle pieces might still lie dormant in the shadows. Briggs knew no verdict could erase the pain, but at least, the truth had been named. Now the Anderson case file rested in the Lauderdale County Police Department's archives, in a glass case engraved with Cold Case #75041, Solve 2025. Inside, each piece of evidence was preserved as is the beer can, the DA lighter, the tin toy car, and the frayed canvas cloth. Cool lights shone on them, making them look like solemn relics of belated justice. No longer evidence of crime, but symbols of perseverance and faith that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, could still surface. Occasionally, people in Meridian still told school children about the case as a cautionary tale, about responsibility, truth, and the value of time. Kids' eyes widened at the part about the metal box in the wall, while adults sat quietly, understanding it was no myth, but the town's real memory. Briggs watched the sunset touch the water. The river now held a tranquil air, as if it had surrendered all it once kept. She bent down, picked up a small stone, and tossed it lightly into the flow. Ripples spread out, fading in the pale gold. Every clue exists, she thought to herself, as long as someone is willing to listen. Overhead, a flock of late-day birds flew south. Briggs turned her back, walking along the dirt path by the river, where the wind carried the damp scent of autumn and the soft rustle of willow leaves. Behind her the Tombigbee kept flowing, through the years, through sins, through belated prayers. And in the archives a few miles away, the metal box, the beginning of it all, lay still behind the glass, a reminder that the truth never sinks. It only waits to be found. The Anderson case, after 50 years of silence, had closed. But that river, where justice was reborn, continued to flow, carrying the story of a small town that learned justice may come late, but never forgets the way home. In America today, the Meridian story, the metal box hidden in the wall of the Trinity Baptist warehouse, the blood-stained Budweiser, can matching DNA in CODIS, fingerprints matching AFES, the Polaroid, revealing the shadow of a striped shirt, and Charles's belated confession, reminds us that the truth does not sink if the community is willing to preserve clues and institutions know to invest in science. First practical lesson: don't let rumors replace evidence. In 1975, David was wrongly accused just because of booze and prejudice. If in today's digital life, those verdicts on social media are even faster and more poisonous. Slow down, report to the police, respect the process, don't share unverified speculations. Second, support resources for forensic investigation, in this case, GPR, under the warehouse floor, 1976 Parker Inc. examination, and DNA. Fingerprint matching bridged half a century, in your locality, lab budgets, evidence storage, and cold case units, determine whether some miles gets named. Third, collaborate early, preserve records. Evie recognized the DA lighter and family photos, neighbors remembered the firelight, in the warehouse, ordinary memory fragments, locked the evidence circuit. In life, keep papers, photos, asset serial numbers, report strange incidents, smoke, arguments, strange cars, instead of not wanting to bother. Fourth, courage to face the truth. Charles chose fear and then committed a bigger crime. We choose honesty, post-traumatic therapy, and seek help when accidentally causing an accident, because hiding often turns mistakes into tragedies. Finally, be patient with justice. Justice delayed is not justice denied. When citizens, local press and government agencies persist together like Detective Briggs did in Meridian. Thank you for following the story to the end, where justice, though late, still finds its way back. Subscribe to the channel to join us in continuing to explore other cold case, where the truth is still waiting to be revealed.